Liminal spaces. I'm sure you've heard about liminal spaces before, and I'm sure you've watched at least one video covering this topic. But what really interests me, well, that's liminal horror that you find in unexpected places. You'll often hear liminal spaces explained as a place between a transition between one place to another, whether that's a physical thing or an emotional or mental state of being. And oftentimes this is bundled with a feeling of nostalgia. This is mostly because during childhood, a lot of us are going through transitional periods. And when you go through that transitional period, it makes you feel a form of nostalgia when you see a picture from your childhood. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be from your childhood. It could just be from a fond memory of a place you've never even been to, just something that's similar to it. Some people just interpret liminal spaces as an empty space. And while I think that's probably fair with what I'm about to explain, I don't think it's always that. People have taken famously what they perceive to be liminal and turn it into horror products and horror media, making the genre of liminal horror. However, today what I want to talk about is some stuff that I find to be liminal horror while not being in a traditional horror setting. But to do this, I will have to explain what exactly I am meaning by horror in this video. See, to me, horror is not always something so in your face, like a horror movie, or something completely scary that jumps out at you. To me, horror can be something completely different. To me, a lot of horror comes down to the feeling of being uncomfortable or unsettled. It's as simple as that feeling of being uncomfortable, having anxiety, like just before you go on a roller coaster, or just before you step foot inside of a haunted house. Horror to me is not always like the mainstream stuff, like jump scares and in your face with noise and building anxiety to just give you a jump scare. So let's talk about these liminal horrors in unexpected places. I remember being extremely young and asking for an Xbox. Me and my brother desperately wanted an Xbox to play the game Halo. Little did I know, Halo would have some hidden stuff within it that would make me find a passion for horror. Most people would not look at Halo and immediately think it's going to be scary in any way whatsoever. Nobody would even think they would be that uncomfortable with this game. But there is a certain transition that happens at a certain point in the game, and I feel like it completely changes what Halo is. Halo 1, due to the low graphics, already looks pretty liminal to begin with. But when this transition in the game happens, something changes.
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it! Sergeant, we're surrounded! God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many, Sarge!
Don't even think about it, Marine.
Oh, this is local!
Get back here, Marine! That's an order!
Upon reaching the level 343 Guilty Spark, the game effectively changes, and while it's still the same gameplay mechanics, still fighting aliens, this portion of the game feels more like a horror game than anything else. Combining the Flood, the race of aliens that will kill everything in its way and not just the humans, combining that with some of these hallways and the tension that it builds, waiting for the Flood to attack you, coming up from behind out of nowhere. Super aggressive, more aggressive than the aliens you've been fighting to this point. Everything about this screams liminal horror to me. And when I watch gameplay or play this to this day, it gives me even more liminal vibes. Because of how young I was when I was playing this, it gives me the nostalgia of playing the game, and then still gives me the horror shock from how creepy this section of the game really was. Just walking into these blank slate hallways to get from one area to another gives me Liminal vibes already. Then adding in the nostalgia of the game. Meanwhile, the music is somber, and you can hear the flood snarling behind you, turning behind you because you think you're going to be attacked constantly. This level of suspense builds a type of horror that is hard to describe. And the low graphics make it even look creepier. This will certainly live on in my memory forever. Another game that I was and will always be obsessed with is Zelda. Specifically Zelda Ocarina of Time changed my childhood. I still play this game once a year all the way through. This is definitely my favorite game of all time. And while I wouldn't consider Zelda scary in the slightest, and definitely not a horror game, there were some elements in this game that were quite unsettling. By far my favorite temple in the game was the Shadow Temple. The Shadow Temple had this eerie vibe to it, and the liminal space was there because of the low graphics, and a little bit of nostalgia thrown in. But even at the time, I was probably getting a liminal feeling without even knowing quite what that was. The Shadow Temple was unexpectedly scary. Hidden fake walls that you needed a tool to see through. Enemies that were shockingly scary and mutilated. All paired with music that makes it sound like a Bitter Snake video. Everything about the Shadow Temple makes me feel completely uncomfortable, and that's exactly why I love it. I wouldn't expect to find horror this well made in a game like this. This game is not supposed to be about horror. It's not even supposed to really scare you. But yet they made a masterpiece in the horror genre without even trying. But nothing gives you more liminal horror vibes than when you get to Bongo Bongo, the boss in this temple. You have to jump down into a dark hole, unknowing of what is there. On top of a trampoline, you sit in the dark. You have to fight this ghoulish boss in the pitch black, liminal, empty space, and fight for your life. And that's liminal horror. Barely into adulthood, I'm sitting around with my brother, looking for something to play on PlayStation. We stumble across a game that's just called PT. Although it has the Silent Hill name attached to it, we say what the hell, and we decide to download this game. And little did I know, this little tiny game would become one of my favorite games and my favorite memories. This was Silent Hill's playable trailer. It was supposed to be turned into a larger game, but it never came to fruition. This does liminal horror like I've never seen before. While this game is a horror game, and it's trying to be a horror game, I think the part that it does unexpectedly is the liminal aspect. You just walk in a circle in this hallway over and over again as things change, and you try to figure out what's going on. Extremely liminal, the entire space. And this isn't liminal for any reason of nostalgia. I think it's just because you're in a never-ending transition. Repeating, never-ending transition. And while I've had my fun talking about liminal horror in video games to this point, these aren't the only mediums I've found this feeling in. Media like movies and TV have given me this feeling too, with some standing out more than others, like the next thing we will talk about. There's one movie I've watched so many times, I think I've lost count. I think it's one of those movies that I come back to and watch when I want to feel comfortable, which is really interesting considering that the very beginning of this movie makes me feel extremely uncomfortable. I know that they're trying to do that to give me the perspective of the girl in the movie. This movie, of course, is Spirited Away. Most people have seen this movie at this point, and you wouldn't really classify this movie as horror. But in the very beginning of this movie, when they get to the tunnel scene, and also when they enter the town, the spirit town, it gives me such a weird, uncanny feeling. It almost feels like they're going for a horror vibe. But in the very beginning, it does seem like they are. The little girl begging her dad not to go through the tunnel. I believe there to be more metaphor here about the horror than just the actual visuals of it being dark and creepy and empty. I believe the metaphor here has to do with how the little girl is asking her parents not to do something that's instinctively making her feel uncomfortable. But since she is just a child, they could care less about what she says, as they are the adults and they know what's best. I think this is a horror that most of us can connect from our childhood. Always listen to adults, and kids don't know better than adults. And at the end of the day, this little girl had a feeling, and she didn't want to do what her parents were doing, and her parents are the ones that suffered for it. And as the story plays out, the girl also goes through some suffering because of her parents' decision and not listening to her. I feel like I could do an entire video based on this movie and how much liminality is inside of it. While the beginning is the only part that I find to be truly a horror element, the entire movie is extremely liminal. I also might get this vibe because a few times when I watched it when I was younger, I had a dream that I was actually the child in this world, and it was an extremely vivid dream. Ever since that dream, I have wanted to go back into that world, but have not had a dream like that since. I think this is what could be giving me the feeling of nostalgia and liminality every time I watch this movie after that. Terrifier truly is one of my favorite horror movies made recently. I think it's because they bring back that old corny slasher style that horror used to have that I think we've went away from. Art the Clown is such a classic serial killer, the way that he doesn't speak and just looks so menacing, even when he's being goofy. However, not surprising is the blood and gore in this movie. What is surprising is how much liminality I find in some of the scenes of this movie. One of those scenes is when Art comes to this old homeless lady, and she comforts him, and the movie displays to us a soft side of Art that we haven't found before, showing us how he got this way in the first place, probably seeking for a mother's love. But in the following scene, we are faced with the reality that Art has now killed that lady, skinned her, and is now wearing her hair and her face. And then this scene unfolds, one that I think is liminal in its own right. Something about the classic horror vibes in this movie, combined with the big empty warehouse, makes me feel liminal in some sense, and gives this entire movie a liminal horror vibe. And maybe that's the case for most clown movies anyways, since it's a fond childhood memory being turned into something horrific. As I got into my early 20s, I picked up the hobby of backpacking, and now it is one of my favorite hobbies ever. There is a movie called Infinite Storm, where a lady hikes up Mount Washington on a blizzard day, only to find a guy sitting up on the mountain alone with no hiking gear and no hiking clothes, or winter clothes at that. She makes it her goal to save this guy, but he makes it his goal to make sure she can't save him. Something about the hiking atmosphere in this movie, combined with how they are all alone because it is a winter day and nobody is hiking the mountain besides them, gives me really liminal vibes. Empty spaces often give most of us liminal vibes, mostly because they are a passageway into the next thing. As you watch this movie and the message unfolds, I believe it gives us a deep sense of liminality based on this passage of her struggles, and the guy she found and his struggles clashing together to help each other in really unexpected ways. Combine this with my love for backpacking, and this thing gave me liminal horror vibes like I couldn't believe. But it wasn't a traditional sense of horror in any way. It was more of a mental horror in learning about the stories of both of these people. It takes a toll on your mind, and is horrific in its own right. It could be a stretch to call this one liminal horror at all, but the entire time I was watching this movie, those were the vibes it was giving me. That's why I won't speak much more on this one, as I think it might be highly personal to me, and it might be the only one who sees this as any type of liminal horror whatsoever. Speaking of personal things, the next category of liminal horror I want to talk about is music. Because of copyright, and most labels not following fair use law, I will try my best to show you guys the moments I am speaking of in this part, but if they are muted, it is because I had to remove them afterwards. King 810 is a band within the metal genre. However, if you were to ask me what genre I really think they are, I wouldn't be able to pinpoint them as one. Their music is all over the place. On their most recent album, they wrote a song that is a straight-up horror melody, but it wasn't until I watched the music video that I grew to love this song even more. There are certain parts in this song where the vocalist's voice, mixed with the haunting melodies in the background, mixed with how creepy the music video looks, it gives you an entire horror vibe.
Tears of oceans of when we were together, my love.
Because of the sheer shakiness of his voice, and because of the horror melodies behind him, this part gives me such creeps. And the fact that they're just standing inside of a black nothingness room, and the build-up from the soft, quiet music to the beatdown, this whole thing gives me liminal horror vibes. Imminence is a Finnish metal band that makes some really interesting music. One of the key focuses of this band is the fact that the vocalist also plays violin. To me, this gives a band that is quite heavy, kind of an airy feeling. And in this song specifically, Continuum, it gives the song a haunting vibe, along with the lyrics. But then as you watch the video, it sort of tells a story that is like a passage of time. And that's what I think gives this song its liminality. The haunting melody and lyrics, along with the video, make this a liminal horror masterpiece. I know not everybody will hear it that way. I don't even know if everybody will hear this, as I might have to mute it for this video. But please check out these songs, as I'll have them in the description, along with everything else in this video if you want to see what it's like. I guess that's sort of the vibe with this entire video. Not everybody is going to agree with me on these things, but maybe it will make you think more about different times in your life that you've encountered something unexpected, liminal or horror-wise. I feel like they tend to go hand in hand. When people are creating horror, I feel like they often accidentally create liminal scenes for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it this time, as this video felt really personal to me for some reason, and I'm not usually making content like this, so it's kind of fun. Let me know if you guys like this more personal style. I can make more videos like this one, because I did have a really good time making it, so hopefully you guys enjoy as much as I did. See ya.